Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about the start of the Civil War. So basically the immediate causes of the Civil War, which are generally going to be considered the election of 1860 in which Lincoln wins, and then the subsequent secession of South Carolina, followed by the very first shots of the war at Fort Sumter. So let's head into it. So the election of 1860, the presidential election, is a pretty contentious, which means really like intense and like debatable election. You have four major people running, each kind of trying to get their own portion of the country to vote for them. So for the Republican Party, you have Lincoln. His main stance on slavery is that he's against it expanding. Then you have the Northern Democrats running with a guy named Stephen Douglas, who we've talked about. Stephen Douglas is an advocate of popular sovereignty to decide slavery's expansion out west. Those are the two major candidates. There's two other ones as well. You have the Southern Democrats running with a guy named Breckinridge. His beliefs on slavery include that slavery should expand everywhere. And then lastly, you have the Constitutional Union Party. This party just really wants the country to stay together and to try to avoid the issue of slavery at all costs. So you have four different people running. The results you can see here on the map definitely show sectionalism, right? Different areas of the country voting for different people based on their ideas on slavery. So Lincoln ends up winning. I know that it looks like there's not, an overwhelming amount of pink or red on the map, which is him. But the states that he did win are pretty populous states, states like Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania. These have a lot of people living in them, and so they have a lot of electoral votes. Lincoln actually wasn't even on the ballot in the southern states, but he was still able to win the majority of the electoral votes. You can see the South predominantly goes for Breckinridge, that Southern Democratic candidate who wants slavery to expand everywhere. Douglas doesn't even win Illinois, his home state. Really, the only state he wins is Missouri and a tiny little part of New Jersey. And then the Constitutional Union candidate, the guy who just kind of wants the country to stay together and avoid slavery, gets some of these states right here that are going to kind of be on the border of the North and the South when the Civil War breaks out. But again, you can definitely see Lincoln wins. You can see the Democratic Party is split between two different candidates, most of them supporting the Southern Democratic candidate. And this really, again, just shows us sectionalism, how the country was being torn apart by this issue of slavery. And once Lincoln is decided the winner, the South starts to really start talking seriously about seceding or leaving the country. To them, even though Lincoln was saying publicly, like, I can't end slavery where it is, I just don't want it to expand. To the South and to slaveholders, Lincoln really represented the end of slavery. He was the abolitionist candidate. Everyone knew that personally he did not like slavery and did not want it to exist. So with now Lincoln in the White House, the South is kind of like, this is it, guys. Like, this is our time that we probably need to leave if we're going to continue our way of life. So on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina drafts a document of secession. They sign it, and they are officially leaving the United States, or also known as the Union, is the United States. Within the next month or so, you have several other states follow: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. So the country is breaking apart, or as you can see here, the newspaper headline, the Union is dissolved, right? The Union, or the agreement that holds all our states together, is falling apart. There are some final attempts at compromise, though, to kind of try to keep the country together. There's a man in Congress named Crittenden, that's his last name, who proposes a compromise. He's like, hey, listen, what if we take this Missouri Compromise line, we just extend it all the way out here to the west, and that way, anything below will be slave, anything above will be free. This was rejected in Congress. It was, again, like this last attempt at compromise, but it really wasn't going to please anyone, the North or the South. Amidst all of this, though, the Southern states leaving and everything, Lincoln takes office in March 1861. When a president takes the oath of office, at their inauguration, when they become president, they give a speech. And Lincoln is giving this speech to not only the northern states, but the southern states too, that are considering leaving if they haven't already left. And he's basically saying, listen, like, I don't want to end slavery where it is. I legally can't do that, I don't think. And then he says, but I also think secession is illegal. What you southern states are doing is illegal, and we'll have to react to that as we need to. But I'm not going to start a war unless the southern states start it. So again, here at the beginning of the war, he's constantly saying that his only real goal is to save the country. It's really not to do anything about slavery. Okay, let's pause though for a second and kind of look at what's going on with the country in terms of like names and how these names and groups of states are kind of shifting. So we see the development of what's called the Confederate States of America, or also just known as the Confederacy. Basically, they are going to be the 11 states that eventually secede from the Union or from the United States. So there are these red states right here. Their capital is Richmond, Virginia. They have a president, Jefferson Davis, and they also create their own constitution, or the guidelines of the rules for their new country, as they say. It is very similar to the United States Constitution, except two major differences. One is that it very explicitly in writing protects slavery, says that the federal government can never take it away. And the second thing it does is it creates this loose union of states where every state has a lot of power and there's no like really strong federal government. So it's kind of like what we had with the Articles of Confederation rather than what we had with a constitution. So this is the Confederate States, or also you can call them the Confederacy or the South. And then the Union is going to be the northern states, or basically just the states that don't leave. So it's the United States. And all of the territories as well. So all of these areas here that aren't states yet. The Union, or the North, also includes 5 border states. They're these states in gray. These are special because they stay in the Union, they don't secede, but they have slavery in those states. And they stay because Lincoln keeps saying, I'm not trying to end slavery, I'm just trying to keep the country together. So he's reassuring those border states that he won't take away their slavery. Those states are Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Missouri. They're super important to the Union. They help to keep DC protected. If you look right here, Washington, DC is right between Virginia and Maryland. Well, Virginia has seceded, so if Maryland secedes as well, then the capital of the United States would be in the Confederacy, which would be a huge problem. The border states also kind of act as like a geographical buffer between the North and the South. You are going to see some battles happen in these states. Also, it's one way that Lincoln can kind of try to justify to the South that, hey, look, the war isn't just about slavery because there are these slave states that have stayed. So you can't say that every slave state has left because I'm going to take away slavery because I'm not. All right, so we've now made it to the first shots of the war. Because at this point, I know I keep saying the word war, but we really don't have a war yet, right? We have states that are leaving, but that's not really a war. So we have to have first shots, some type of like show of aggression before we can actually call this a war. And that happens in April 1861. So the Confederate Army, which was created after the Confederacy was created in 1861, it basically just included people from these southern states who wanted to fight against the U.S. Army or the Union Army of the North. And they start to capture forts that used to belong to the U.S. government along the coast here. And the only fort that's really left is Fort Sumter, which is right outside Charleston, South Carolina. And there are some Union troops inside. And so Lincoln knows that his men are surrounded by Confederate troops at Fort Sumter, but he's facing a dilemma. He knows if he fires shots to defend the fort, then he's going to be the one who has started the Civil War. And he doesn't want to be the one to start the war. But he also knows if he just surrenders the fort to the Confederate Army, that he's going to look weak. So what he decides to do is to send in supplies, food and reinforcements to these men. It's not an act of aggression at all, but it basically leaves the decision of war in the hands of Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. And Jefferson Davis decides to fire the first shots. So on April 12th, 1861, Confederate troops fired on US soldiers inside Fort Sumter. The fort was surrendered in several hours of shots going back and forth. It becomes Confederate, and there was actually no bloodshed. Actually, well, I think like a donkey died, but other than that, there were no humans that died. So this is really just the first shots. It's not the first major bloodshed of the war. If you want to watch a video on the Battle of Fort Sumter, you are more than welcome to. The link is right here. Just go click on it in the PowerPoint. So this is the end of Unit 6. We will be starting off Unit 7 with the actual Civil War.